Boa tarde e bem-vindos. Desculpa pela informação errada que aparentemente circulou, mas de qualquer forma a gente desejou receber o professor Patrice Maniglier aqui nesta sala mais confortável e de toda forma na quinta-feira às 14 horas teremos outro evento acerca da questão ser socioliano na filosofia, que é um evento em torno do livro de Patrice Maniglier, A Vida Enigmática dos Signos, Saussure e o Renascimento do Estruturalismo. Ele está apresentando aqui, em termos de um lançamento, e a tradução da versão francesa, que foi publicada em 2006. Eu vou fazer uma apresentação misturado entre inglês e português, mas a palestra será em inglês, tá? E depois na discussão, nas perguntas, a gente pode usar as línguas com as quais estamos mais acostumados. Já que uma das temáticas da palestra é que qualquer língua é outra língua. Então, antes de apresentar formalmente o professor Maniglier, só quero expressar minha alegria e a felicidade de encontrá-lo aqui. Nosso evento foi organizado em parte pela professora Gabriela Jaquet. O professor Maniglier participou da banca de defesa dela em janeiro, em Paris. E também o Programa de Pós-Graduação em Filosofia, com os apoiadores. Agradeço muito pela recepção da ideia que tivemos. E o Programa de Pós-Graduação em Letras, também evidentemente pela temática, foi muito interessado em representar esta área de pesquisa na PUC. Também quero acrescentar que o grupo de pesquisa que eu coordeno, Sistema e Estrutura, é um grupo de pesquisa que formou já vários alunos, articulamos vários projetos. E um dos primeiros projetos, na verdade, por volta a 2013, 2014, quando tive a proposta de organizar o número da revista Veritas, e o tópico que me interessou, então, de organizar o dossiê era recentes publicações na filosofia francesa contemporânea em torno da ontologia. Entrei em contato com o professor Maniglier, ele me deu a sugestão, ele me falou de uma situação de um dossiê composto de vários artigos já escritos em francês que iam ser traduzidos para árabe, se não me engano, e que seria interessante tê-lo disponível na Veritas, no Brasil, em português. E na época dispusemos de um grande número de alunos de pós-graduação, particularmente trabalhando na área da pós-graduação da filosofia francesa contemporânea. Então, deleguei a tarefa de traduzir os artigos aos doutorandos e fizemos dois números. Eu não me lembro se você já tem a versão física do número, mas segundo a edição, o seu artigo está publicado aqui, então gostaria de muitos anos depois de passar e te dar esse número, e também te agradecer novamente pela participação dessa iniciativa, que configurou um contexto em que a gente conseguiu ter acesso aos pensamentos mais recentes, os mais inovadores sendo trabalhados no âmbito da filosofia francesa contemporânea. Então, eu vou te apresentar, então, Patrice Maniglier. Eu vou fazer uma tradução a partir do inglês, é maître de conférence em filosofia, no departamento de filosofia da Universidade de Nanterre, Paris-Ouest, Paris-10, na França. Ele é um antigo aluno da École Normale Supérieure de Paris. Ele trabalhou como professor na Universidade de Essex antes de se integrar no corpo docente permanente no Nanterre em 2012. Seus trabalhos articulam vários campos de pesquisa: a filosofia francesa contemporânea, naturalmente, a filosofia das ciências sociais, a linguística, especificamente, a antropologia também, psicanálise também, a metafísica e a estética. Nos ramos da estética, ele trabalhou, publicou no campo da teoria do cinema e sobre as artes contemporâneas. E, mais recentemente, sobre os sistemas, as ciências do sistema da Terra, Earth System Sciences. Então, seria mais ou menos uma tradução deste campo. Ele defende uma reinterpretação histórica, assim como uma reativação contemporânea do estruturalismo, ambos nas ciências sociais, especialmente a partir da linguística e da antropologia, com Saussure e Lévi-Strauss, e também na filosofia. Mais recentemente, sua colaboração com Bruno Latour, que, aliás, só para enfatizar que o Sr. Maniglier tem trabalhado muito com Latour, tendo feito parte da sua rede de colaboradores e associados. Então, mais recentemente, sua colaboração com Bruno Latour tem conduzido ou a defender uma concepção pluralista da, entre aspas, Terra, apoiado sobre conceitos estruturalistas que auxiliam a entender por que a Terra é ambos um e múltiplo. Ele contribui frequentemente à discussão pública na mídia, France Inter, France Culture, Le Monde, Libération. Ele é autor de vários livros, então, novamente, esse livro, A Vida Enigmática dos Signos, Saussure e o Nascimento do Estruturalismo, foi publicado pela editora Léo Cher em 2006 na França e está recebendo, então, sua tradução aqui no Brasil pela editora Cultura e Barbárie. Então, esse livro está à venda aqui na mesa, depois da conferência, se quiserem, vocês conversam com a professora Gabriela. Ele também é autor dos seguintes livros. Vou fazer uma tradução aproximada dos títulos, embora não foram traduzidos para o português, pelo que eu saiba. A Perspectiva do Diabo, Figurações do Espaço e da Filosofia, do Renascimento a Rosemary's Baby, um filme de Polanski. Actes Sud, sendo editora, 2010. Foucault vai ao cinema, publicado em 2011. A Filosofia que se fez, publicado em 2019. A Terra, o Filósofo e o Vírus, Bruno Latour, explicado pela atualidade, pela atualidade, 2021, e Irmãs, para uma psicanálise feminista, que foi escrito em coautoria com a Silvia Lippi e publicado na edição do Seuil em 2023. agradeço novamente a presença de todos vocês e, particularmente, do professor Maniglier, a quem eu passo a palavra. Ele falará sobre o tema A Terra é estruturada como uma linguagem. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado. Well, in mio portuguese, don't care. Okay, so sorry for my speaking English. At least I have an excuse. I'm not speaking French, so that's one route out of the form of cultural imperialism. At least one. Right? So we are under the same kind of cultural imperialism, under a certain respect, and we are precisely on the day where that problem, that particular form of imperialism, will probably be very, very actual today. We'll see. Anyway, I want to thank you for being here today, even though I've been told that there's going to be a huge storm. If my English is too, I don't know, too French or too British or too confused, just wave, and I will try to understand that that means that you don't have a problem with the concept, but with the words. And Saussure says it's the same thing. So we need to know if you don't perceive well what I'm saying, it means that you don't understand well what I'm saying. That's one of the main messages of the book. I want to thank very, very warmly first Gabriela Jaquet, who is my very dear, I can say, student, even though she's not a student anymore. But so it was one of those wonderful encounters in your academic life when you have a student who becomes really someone who pushes your ideas further. And the kind of thing that I'm trying to do and that I will present about structuralism in the line of Saussure, being Saussurean in philosophy, Gabriela has fostered or has developed it about Foucault in particular, and I need people who expand this vision of structuralism beyond the two authors, maybe three, 2.5 authors on which I work, who are Saussure and Lévi-Strauss, because structuralism is a trans-disciplinary movement, and it only makes sense to say something about structuralism if it can cover different areas. So I am immensely grateful to Gabriela for the work she's done and she will be doing, I hope, in the direction of a reinterpretation of structuralism. So if I'm here today, it's mainly because, and thanks to her, thanks again. And thanks, of course, to Norman, who has invited me here, and who's someone who, well, is a part of this very rare, very elective congregation or sect, international sect of structuralists, of kind of yeah, it's a secret international, international structuralist, thank you, Norman, for everything you've done for me and for structuralism. And again, I hope this is the continuation of a collaboration that will deepen in the future between the three of us and between more. Okay, so I'm here today to speak, well, so l'ensamento of a book of so this enigmatic life of science, which has been translated recently, and I've come to Brazil for a kind of tour to present the book, but also to defend the sort of reinterpretation of structuralism that the book started like 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And so if we need to reactivate structuralism, it's because there is something, sorry, there is something in structuralism that makes sense for today. Oh. Yes, I have. So there is an actualidad of structuralism. There's something meaningful for the present in structuralism, and that's the reason why we need to understand what happened under the label of structuralism. So it's not a purely historical word. Through the history of ideas, what we want to do is to, and I say we because I associate particularly Gabriela, with me, what we want to do is to uncover the potentiality for the present. And because we think that structuralism is at least useful, if not necessary, to cope with contemporary challenges. And that's the reason why I decided to speak to you today about the Earth. About the Earth, because I think there is no more actual and urgent problem than the question of the Earth today. And I am here in a city and in a region where I think this emergency has been made very clear by the last climatic events. So clearly the inundation, what's the word in English for that inundation? Floodings, yeah, the floodings that happened, was it last year or a few months ago at least? In May, six months ago. Here is a manifestation of change. A change in what? A change in the global climatic system of what? Of the Earth. The climate change is something that happens to the Earth or to one particular system of the Earth, and it's also a way the Earth as a system reacts to disturbances. Disturbances on that particular case, when it concerns climate and climate change, disturbances that have the form of carbon emissions. The carbon emissions, not only carbon, but greenhouse gases emissions, have a particular effect on the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle is a cycle. It means that it has something systemic. It's one of the biogeochemical cycles that constitute, well, what we might call the Earth as kind of global, even though I will come back to the question of globality, as a kind of global actor or entity. So some philosophers and thinkers, among which I must name at least three, maybe four, five actually. I must name first the Indian, Australian, American historian Dipesh Chakrabarty, who published a very famous article in 2009, which has been turned into a book more recently under the title Climate of History, where he is one of those who argued that climate change is one aspect of the new kind of agency of the Earth. So the Earth is something that comes into history, into human history. So this is a kind of phenomenon that I think structuralism is useful to apprehend. But first, we need to understand what it means exactly. So my thesis will be today, so the Earth has become something that impacts our life, but to understand what it is, what we must mean by the Earth, we actually need structuralist tools, intellectual and conceptual tools. So Dipesh Chakrabarty, Isabelle Stengers, the Belgian philosopher, Bruno Latour, and also I probably could mention a national figure, Eduardo de Castro, who published a book with Deborah Danowski some years ago under the name The Ends of the World. I don't know the title in English, in Portuguese, but it was something like that. And so those five authors, repeat, Dipesh Chakrabarty, Isabelle Stengers, Bruno Latour, Eduardo de Castro, and Deborah Danowski, so one author, and two. They all argued that climate change is a manifestation of the action of that entity called the Earth. We are at the end of the COP, Conference of Parties on Biodiversity. Biodiversity is with climate change, or rather, I should say, the collapse of biodiversity is with climate change, another manifestation of this action of the earth, which is a reaction to our actions. So there is a kind of new entity. Maybe the person who qualified that event the most accurately, according to me, is Isabel Spengers, when she spoke of what she called the intrusion of Gaia. So the intrusion of Gaia. Gaia, the earth. The name of the earth that helps understanding that the earth is not what we thought it was. Let's call it Gaia, we'll come back to that. The earth has come into our lives in a way that didn't make sense in the past, at least for us humans. What does that exactly mean? So Chakrabarty has this very interesting way of presenting things when he says, well, for the first time in human history, the earth is not only a kind of framework for human actions, but a sort of a partner that, as I said, reacts to our actions. It's very interesting to see that Hannah Arendt, when she wrote her book, The Human Condition, in the 50s, I don't remember exactly the date, she started, it was the time of the launch of the Sputnik, and so it was the beginning of space as the new frontier, as they say. And she says something that is quite interesting for us, because she said, well, in fact, the planet seen from the sky, seen from the satellites, seen from the moon, is not a historical space. A historical space is here on the ground, on the terrestrial ground, but the planet itself for her was not a historical reality. Well, climate change and the collapse of biodiversity and all the manifold manifestations that we are about to see show, in fact, that she was wrong. That, in fact, the planet has become a historical fact. So it has, in the past, if you want, at the time of Thucydides, of the war, the Peloponnese, the armies used to fight within a space that wasn't part of the fight. Today, what we are seeing means that the planet itself is part of the fight. It's one of the stakeholders. It's something that takes position. So if you want, the Earth is on the stage of history now. It's not anymore kind of framework. Latour had a very beautiful way of saying that. It's as if we were in a theater and the walls of the theater, the building itself, came onto the stage and started to have a dialogue with the characters on the stage. Okay, so what that means exactly is this. The Earth reacts to our actions. So the Earth is an actor. In fact, if you wanted to be more semiotic, we would use a word by the French semiotician Remas that Latour used, which is actant. But in English, it's been translated by actor, actually. Actually, it's a mistranslation. So it's something that has some kind of initiative. That is what it means. So the Earth has some initiative. Technically, that means that the reactions of the Earth are not linear consequences of our actions, simply because the Earth being a system, a dynamic system, that has some kind of stability, even though it's a stability far from the equilibrium, but it's a stability. Therefore, it aims at reproducing the same state of affairs. When it is disturbed, it's going to change precisely that stability, and that is what we are seeing now. So we are seeing the general stability of the different cycles that make the Earth being reorganized as a consequence of human actions, entropic actions. which doesn't mean that the actions of the entire human species, but actions that are made by human beings. We'll come back to that. So that is the event. Okay? This event is very important in the sense that, speaking of the intrusion of Gaia, of the fact that the Earth has become a historical agent, is a way of diagnosing our present. We are at the time of the coming of the Earth. In the same way as Nietzsche used to say, we are at the time of the death of God. The death of God, that's over. God has been resurrected, not in a good sense. But our present is not the time of the death of God. Our present is the time of the coming of the Earth. Okay? So in Foucauldian terms, you could call that a diagnosis. It's something that I think is very important for people who are interested in critical thinking, because it means that we need to change the very critical tools we use to understand what is at stake now. Michel Foucault used to say that philosophy is all about diagnosing the present. That is, trying to understand what's the difference between before and now. Well, the difference between before and now has to do with the coming of the Earth. It means that the way we used to think is not valid anymore if we want to be the contemporary of ourselves. So that is the event that I think we need to, by which we can quantify the present. So if there is something actual, again in Foucault's sense, and here I'm thinking of a text by Foucault called Qu'est-ce que les Lumières? What is enlightenment? So if we want to be up to the present, if we want precisely to say something about the actuality, about the now, we need to speak of the Earth. Okay. So that's why, since I want to say that structuralism has to do with now, what is most present for us, I thought that the best way to prove that there are good reasons to buy my book and to get to know better about Saussure and structuralism in general is actually to show you that it can help apprehending that particular event that in fact defines what it means to be now, the intrusion of Gaia or the coming of the Earth as a historical agent. Okay, so that's the general idea. So now why is structuralism useful for that? Well, in fact, it's because the Earth, as I said, is a global action. It has to do with the notion of totality. Of course, when we speak of something that has to do with the totality, we always very naturally imagine that the totality is at another scale, it's on another level, it's up and above its parts, right? So when we say the Earth is a system, we have the tendency to think that that system is above the parts. The parts are what? The parts are the various territories of the Earth and the various agents, among which you can count yourself, as a matter of fact. But also collective, individuals, corporeal or incorporeal, material or immaterial entities. Like, for instance, X is a terrestrial actor, just like Elon Musk, even though they don't have the same size and they don't have the same nature. A state is a terrestrial actor, but also a river, the Amazonian basin in itself is a terrestrial actor. So terrestrial actors have different sizes. And you could think that the Earth is the system that is made of all these actors, even though it is not reducible to the sum of its parts, precisely because it is a system. So as I said, it has some initiative. So that's the most natural way of thinking. And that indeed is the way Earth system sciences try to conceptualize what is going on today. So the modelizations of the Earth are modelizations that use the notion of system. And as I said, the system is made of interlocking cycles of different chemical elements like carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, water itself, and so on. So when something like the floodings happen, the natural tendency is to see it as an expression of something that Earth system sciences try to give knowledge about, which is precisely the changes in the mechanisms of the Earth system. So, in fact, then we turn to the IPCC, to the organ of the United Nations for the climate, to understand better the connection between particular events, like the floodings, and the global mechanisms. It's natural. It's okay. So basically, what do? We turn to sciences. We turn to that particular form of knowledge that has been developed in the tradition of what we call modernity, which are the Earth system sciences, to understand better the intrusion of Gaia, or the coming of the Earth. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but I'm going to say that we should not do only this. That there is a problem if you think that the truth about the Earth is only given by the Earth system sciences or by the IPCC. So why? Why I am not completely happy with the idea that the quantification of what happens to us, or the way by which we actually encounter the Earth, is only given through the lenses of the sciences, which most of us here, I suppose, don't know anything about. Is there anyone here who is actually a climatologist and who can understand properly how the propositions that are made about the Earth climate are constructed within science? No, there's no climatologists here. Right, so you're like me, right? You read articles, possibly you read Nature or Nature Climate Sciences and so on, but you don't have a kind of direct application in those sciences. Nonetheless, you have an experience of the Earth through, well, if you've been impacted by the floodings, you have an experience of the Earth. So this looks like a classic problem. It's a problem between the relation between a scientific understanding of what's happening and a more experiential understanding of what is happening. The first-person experiential, non-scientific relation to something, to an event, particularly in that case. But it's a bit more than that, I would say. In fact, if we only trust modern sciences to tell us what the Earth is, and if we think that the Earth is what Earth system sciences say, and who do, nothing else. In fact, we are repeating in the very way we try to apprehend that event, the mechanism that produced that event. Because that mechanism that produced that event has a name. It is coloniality. What is capitalist imperialism? It is, in fact, a globalization of a particular way of inhabiting the Earth that is the cause of this awakening of Gaia, of this reaction of the Earth system. The carbon that is emitted in the atmosphere, as I said, is global. It's global really technically because the atmosphere is such that the carbon particles go everywhere. Right? They're not just here or there in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a global thing. So they go up to the atmosphere and then they come back in various ways. But they go through something global. However, the cause, of course, is not global. The cause is particular. There are particular human and non-human assemblage that send this carbon in the world. It's not all the human beings, but all the human beings, and in fact, we should say all the terrestrial beings are impacted. So the cause is particular, but the effect is global. If now you try to understand the relation between the cause and the effect through Earth system sciences or sciences in general, you're using a particular way of apprehending things, which is precisely linked to, in fact, what has been causing that reaction, because modern sciences are part of this general way of inhabiting the Earth. That is responsible for that. So modern sciences are not simply knowledge. Modern sciences are a particular way of knowing things. And this way of knowing things is embedded in the networks of what we don't quite know how to call, but let's use the word Latour, modernity. Modernity. Some would say capitalism, but I think if you only say capitalism, you don't understand the complexity of that assemblage, of that network of things. Because you probably could imagine, if capitalism did not need the scientific revolution, a particular way of using this scientific knowledge in particular forms of technologies, particular political institutions and so on, if there was not this kind of assemblage of different institutions, that would not have happened. So let's call that modernity. So Earth system sciences are in the tradition of knowledge that is proper to modernity. If we pretend that this way of apprehending the Earth is the only valid way of apprehending the Earth, we are in fact repeating the form of hegemony that is at the very cause of the event. So the argument here, if you want, is an argument of epistemic injustice. You could put it like that. So there's something wrong in understanding the oneness of the Earth through the lenses of only one particular part. And in particular, through the lenses of that particular part that is responsible for this catastrophic, and even you could say apocalyptic, unification of the planet. So I think that we should resist this temptation to let scientific knowledge monopolize the understanding of that particular event. And that, I think, is a particularly difficult problem, because we also need those sciences. So we need to do two things that seem contradictory at the same time. We need to say that we can, in fact, only understand the Earth thanks to climate sciences and other kinds of sciences. But we also need to say that it's not only that. Not only is a word used by Peruvian anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena in a wonderful book called Earth Beings, where she developed this general way of practicing anthropology and saying anthropology is the art of not only. So it's the state, but not only the state that is at stake in peasant resistance movements in the Andes, on which she worked and Quechua people. But for the Earth, it's the same. So we are now at a time that is quite different from the time when Lévi-Strauss used to write. Lévi-Strauss is, of course, the father figure of structuralism, because at the time of Lévi-Strauss, he developed structuralism because he was interested in the relation between differences and universality. So, of course, it's anthropology. Anthropology is a theory of the human in general. But as you might know, Lévi-Strauss argued that you can only say something about humanity as such if you say something that not only is valid or is the same for all particular human group, but that will help you understanding precisely the variety of human forms of existence. So structuralism is this idea that you can only say something about everything if what you say about everything explains at the same time why it must become in a various set of forms. And Lévi-Strauss had developed a very powerful tool to do that. It's the concept of group of transformations. In fact, the structure, and that is my best understanding of the notion of structure, I don't have anything better than Lévi-Strauss, is, so the structure is a group of transformation. What is a group of transformation? A group of transformation is quite simply a system of variants. Variants are not variations. Variants are entities that are defined by their position in a group of transformation, that is by differences with other variants. So for instance, the Oedipus myth, as Lévi-Strauss famously argued in an article called The Structure of the Myth, which is published in Structural Anthropology. The Oedipus myth is not a set of motifs or particular characters that will be recurrent as a kernel, as a kernel in all the different variants of the Oedipus myth. Since there are different ways of telling the myth that we all know. There are always variants of the myth. But Lévi-Strauss argued that the Oedipus myth in itself is not what is invariant and common to all those variants. That is what you would find as a set or a list of recurrent features in all the variants of the myth, as a kind of skeleton, right? The notion we usually have of the type and the variance is that you have a kind of kernel skeleton that can be recognized in all the variants, and then you have additional elements that vary. So something in the middle that doesn't vary, and something in the margins that vary, right? And Lévi-Strauss argued that, in fact, we can look at variation in a different way by simply defining the variants by their differences, simply by their differences. So what makes them part of the same thing is not what they have in common, but the way they differ from one another. And the structure is a matrix of variations. So, and it is nothing else. So the Oedipus myth in itself is not something above and transcendent to its variation. The Oedipus myth is a structure and not an essence. There is no essence. There is a structure. It means there is no identical kernel of things, but there is a matrix of variation. And therefore, you can redefine all the elements you are interested in, all the parts, as positions in a system of differences. That intuition comes from Saussure. When Saussure said that a sign is only made of differences. Sign is only made of differences. So when I speak, if you perceive, therefore also understand what I'm saying, it's not because you recognize in what I'm saying something that has been said before, as if there was something common, a kind of positive set of things that are in what I'm saying as they were in what you've heard in the past. It's because you have already in you something that helps you identify the difference that I am making when I am speaking. So what we share when we share a language is a sense of the differences. It is not a set of prototypes that we can re-identify. Okay? It's the way by which your sensibility has been disciplined in such a way that when something happens, you can follow the difference or the variation. So that is the structuralist intuition, basically. Now, the structuralist intuition is super powerful. It was very helpful to overcome the dilemma between universalism and relativism. And that's why Lévi-Strauss, even though very few people understood that, going even now actually, there are very few to understand that you can be at the same time a relativist and a universalist, as Lévi-Strauss was, simply because we think that we have nothing in common but that which makes us differ from one another. Again, the unity is not above as an essence, as a Platonician essence. The unity is in the middle, between the variants. Okay, so that is a very powerful intuition. And maybe you can sense that we are going towards the Earth here, because you can see that there is here a way of treating the relation between multiplicity and oneness. There is one myth, but a multiplicity of variants. But the relation between the one and the multiple is not the Platonic relation, where you have one invariant identity that is recurrent in all its parts, like many triangles of different forms, but one concept of triangle. To say that, in fact, you should look at things not in terms of essences, but in terms of structures, is to say that if you have the structure of the triangle, if that existed, the structure of the triangle would be exactly adequate to the variation of triangles, the different kinds of triangles, not something that is independent from that variation. However, as I said, it's not enough to agree on something like the Earth. It's not enough. Why? Because today we are not only concerned by this relation between particularity and universality. We are concerned with the relation between oneness or totalization and parts, elements. So it's a very different situation, which you can illustrate using the terms that the post-colonial thinker, who is also the translator of Derrida, Gayatri Spivak, used in a book called Death of a Discipline, and in an article called, where she introduces the concept of planetariety. Actually, she didn't think of climate change or anything like that. But it's a very interesting article for us because she anticipated, I think, our questions. For reasons that have to do more with the post-colonial situation. What is this situation? This situation is a situation in which the world has been globalized. So in the context of globalization, basically, she argues, differences are not anymore different ways of being human, but different ways of being within something that is common. If you forgive me for the vulgarity, differences are now different ways of being in the same ship. Right? So that is what globalization means. So different ways of being within the colonial situation. And she says very beautifully that this is very different from the way differences was imagined at the time when anthropology was born, which she illustrates with the novel by Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. In the case of Heart of Darkness, difference was always far at the end of the journey. You had to go far away to meet difference. Today, we don't need to go far away to meet differences. And let's say the white man doesn't need to go into the jungle to kill and genocide people. They don't need to do that. They only need to take their car to go at work. And they destroy the territories of all the terrestrial beings in the world. Why? Precisely because they are part of the same climatic system or biogeochemical system. And therefore they emit greenhouse effect gases which transform all the territories of the Earth. There are places on this planet that have never been visited by the human foot, like the tepuis in Venezuela, who are very special kinds of ecosystems which have been completely protected from globalization. But today, they are changing very quickly, even though no human being has actually visited them, simply because from a distance, we do things that destroy that territory. It's even a very strong political problem because those island states of the Pacific that are going to see their territory erased by the rise of the waters are in a situation in which policies that are decided in Europe or in the United States, or for that matter in Brazil or China or anywhere else, have a consequence on their territory. So there are sovereign states which are defined by the fact that they have territory, but this territory is destroyed by policies decided in other states. Is that an act of war or not? So that situation, again, is very different from the situation where basically you needed to go on the territory and invade those territories to destroy them. Now you don't need to do that. Why? Because we are part of the same thing, to be polite. So that relation between parts and one is different from the relation between differences and universality. Differences today are different ways of being terrestrial, of being of the Earth. So in that circumstance, we need to resist, as I said, very strongly to any way by which particular imagination of the oneness would monopolize the understanding of what is happening. And for that, well, we have the tool of structuralism. So how do we reconcile, again, the necessity to understand that we are part of something that is one, but also that this oneness needs to be understood in different ways, okay? So you could even try to redefine the different parts of the Earth, or as I call them, the different terrestrial territories, by the different ways by which the oneness itself is understood. And now I'm going to give you an example, maybe to make that more clearer, which is taken from, well, one of the national figure of Brazil, I think. His name is Davi Kopenawa. Maybe you've heard of him. He's a Yanomami shaman. You know, the Yanomami is population, I guess you know. When I'm in Europe, I need to say where the Yanomami are. But so in north of Brazil, near Venezuela, part of Venezuela, as a matter of fact. And in his book, written with his French anthropologist Louis Albert, Kopenawa had this translation of the IPCC discourse about climate change. And he said that climate change is not only due to carbon emissions. It's in fact, it's the same phenomenon, it's the same mechanism as the mechanism that produces the epidemics of smallpox that decimated his own population, which he called the Shawara epidemic. From a scientific point of view, this is probably wrong. Scientists would probably say, no, it's carbon emissions, and carbon emissions have nothing to do with smallpox. There are different etiology, different causal mechanisms. So how can we take seriously, as Eduardo de Castro would say, how can we take seriously this translation, these other ways of understanding what it means to be in the center? Kopenawa says, look, the problem with you, the white, is that in fact, what you want the metal. It's the extractivist problem. You want the metal, and the metal you don't know because you don't dream, because you don't take the ayahuasca, you're not trained to see things. But if you were trained, you would see that metallic things emit a particular smoke, which is responsible both for the burning of the sky and for the spreading of the Shawara epidemic. It's the metal that is responsible. So he has a different etiology, right? Says behind the metal and behind this passion, this metallic passion of the white, there is the passion for what is hard as opposed to what is smooth, what can be curved. So the Yanomami know that they cherish what is smooth, what can be folded, where the white want things that are hard. So he also has a kind of ethical understanding of what's wrong. What's wrong with us, the white, is that we are too attracted to hard things, to solid things, not enough interested in smooth things. Okay, so that is what I would call a version It's a version, it's a variant, it's a version of you. Okay. My claim is that if we want to understand the Earth itself in a more complete and satisfactory way, we need to collect the different variants of the Earth, the different versions of the Earth, such as this one, and to understand those different variants in a group of information, just as we did it for the myth, for instance, or for the different cultures. So now it's not about culture anymore, it's about variants of the Earth. So if we do that, we can reconcile the idea that there is only one Earth in the sense that there is no escape. As the activists say there is no planet B. There is no planet B. That's what the oneness of the Earth mainly means, that there is no planet B. In fact, what that means most precisely is that the time it would take to build devices that would enable human beings to migrate out of the planet Earth towards Mars, for instance, as Elon Musk would hope. The time we would need to do that is longer than the time it will take for the Earth to react in such a way that it destroys the possibility of maintaining the infrastructures, the technological, social infrastructures that enable us precisely to build the devices to go out of the Earth. So that is what needs to be one, in fact, for the Earth. So I suggest that we try to make that effort of renouncing that kind of vision from nowhere, that vision from the sky, that sees the Earth as a Copernican planet that is unified as a gravitational body, and we accept that the Earth is multiple. There's many Earths. There are many Earths. But the fact that there are many Earths doesn't mean that there is no one Earth. It means that the oneness of the Earth is a structure. So the truth of the Earth today is structural. That's exactly what it means to say that the Earth is structured as a language, since it is indeed what Saussure said about language. In my book, The Enigmatic Life of Sign, A Vida Enigmatica dos Signos, I don't know, I'm trying to have a Carioca accent, which is a total failure, and trying to put a little shit in the end, too far from any kind of Portuguese accent to succeed. Anyway, but in that book, I emphasize one particular phrase, one particular sentence by Saussure, which is the following. Saussure says, French doesn't come from Latin. It is Latin. So what I'm trying to show in that book is what I now call Dionysian structuralism, the structuralisme dionysiaque, which is the idea that a language is at the same time many languages, and that the notion of structure was elaborated since the very beginning to understand why the fact that we repeat something engenders differences and even different ways of differing, since Saussure adds French is Latin, but it is also Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and so on. So it's very far from what I call the Apollinian or standard vision of structuralism that dominated the reception of structuralism, which thought that structuralism had to do with the notion of invariance. As if Saussure tried to identify like the proper French, disregarding the dialects. It's a totally misguided interpretation of Saussure. If you read Saussure or my book, you will see that Saussure's lecture, Saussure's main thesis is exactly opposed to that. His idea is that a long, I guess there is the same distinction in Portuguese as as in French, between langue and parole, which you don't find in English. In English, the translators use the notion of linguistic system and speech. This language is equivocal in English. It could be the faculty of speaking language, so faculty, or languages are particular languages. But for Saussure, the langue, the system of a particular language, is not that which makes that language stable or static. It's on the contrary. It is that which explains what is precisely changing in that particular language. So what Saussure calls signs or signals, are the elements of change. They are those things that really exist, but only exist because they change. And what Saussure tries to explain is the fact that it is by speaking a language, that is by repeating always the same thing, that we change, not even thinking that we're going to change. So it develops a method to identify what bears change, what is the element that changes in a language. And it is not the words we think we know when we speak. It's specific elements within our words and our phonemes, for Saussure, are elements of change. They are not elements of identity, or rather, they are elements of identity because they are that which, as it says, is due to change. So as you can see, Dionysian structuralism tries to reclaim, you could say, like a réclamation, to reclaim this understanding of variation, which structuralism was all about. And it is this understanding of variation that I think is useful to approach something like yours, as it is actually the best tool we have to approach anything that is one and multiple at the same time. So that's what it means to say that the Earth is structured as a language, that the Earth is a structure. It means that the Earth is a system of variance of itself. And that's the only way by which we can both stay in relation with the Earth, one, and acknowledge the multiplicity and the variations by which this Earth is qualified by those who are mainly interested by that, without sacrificing this diversity and having a little chance at least to inhabit the colonial structure of our world in a less repetitive or in a less destructive way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Get another microphone. Thank you very much. It's very provocative talk, and also for presenting to us the scientific research that you've been undertaking for many years. I'm sure that there will be many questions. So I think there's a little bit of a competition who would like to ask the first question, but if my director doesn't mind, I'll ask it to ladies first.
I just want to make the first question because I would like just to thank a lot this opportunity here that Professor Nicanor and the department gave to us to be here to share this moment, and thank you a lot for it's an honor for everybody, I think, to be able to discuss with you. And well, I just have a question about I'd like to link two moments. One moment of your talk now, and the other moment was in your book, the Filosofia da PUC-RS, the philosopher, Earth, virus, and it's about exactly this relation and this non-relation also between science and the other discourses. That I think it's a wonderful way to reopen the epistemological question that was in debate in a moment, and to reconciliate that, or to think that with this ontology of sign is something very, very, very different and very important, in the sense that we can, as you show now, we can use very, very strongly, very in a practical way. So I will read the rest of the other part of my question. Also because English, it's not exactly the first thing I can think in all the concepts. But so in your book, you mentioned three principles or three moments to grasp something like a global entity as the Earth, to avoid a transcendent point of view. These principles are delocalization, identification, and translation, the concept you were talking about for us now, which seeks to understand the different kind of discourses involved in experience, science, cosmology, different kind of techniques, as this wonderful moment about the shaman was this translation of discourse is a very, very strong moment, I think, in a collectivity discourse. So this moment of translation as a system of variance, in exactly structuralist sense, that is a mutual regulated transformations without a center. So I think this concept of translation has a strong link with the new set of linguistics you see in structuralism. That's not a scientific formalization, but the reflection of the sign in action by showing the same equivocity regarding reality in general. So this approximation between the translation and the action of the sign. I would like to ask you if you can return to this concept of translation operating between modes of existence, emphasizing how to understand the specific mechanisms involved in this operation, and how, for example, we can be sure that they are not uncommensurable in a Kuhnian sense. And when I was thinking about this question and thinking about the relations or the mechanisms you describe in your book, to be sure that we can do this, we can put in action this translation, which is the third moment of the operation. It's the accomplishment. I found, I remembered that Kuhn uses the word, or uses the concept of translation when he is responding, when he is answering or trying to defend himself from the critics he received for the concept of incommensurability. And he uses that in an article, 1982, so a long time after the book, the structure of
scientific revolution.
In English, it's not going to work. So the article is commensurability, comparability, and communication. And well, we cannot exactly follow him. I think it's I don't know how you're going to answer the question, but I was thinking that we cannot exactly follow what he the way he tries to save the notion, because he says that, well, the problem is that commensurability needs a reference, okay, and he tries to get rid of the notion of reference by using translation, but his translation is in a specific one which gonna stay with the sense, but he doesn't explain what sense is. So I was just linking taking the situation of modes of existence and the as-centered position that it implies. And like it's a translation without a language in common, or if we're gonna use in a Saussurean way, I mean, like you have to develop another kind of language which will take the difference together. So wow, this is
okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question. If I can answer to the question. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the reference too, because I'm not sure I've read that text like you. But so I think the answer in a way is simple, even though what means very difficult. But the answer is this. The kind of translations that we are interested in are translations that imply untranslatability. That's exactly what James was always saying, right? The group of transformation is not made of commensurable languages. It's made of incommensurable languages. Precisely the notion of structure helps understanding that very Benjamin kind of understanding of translation, that it makes no sense to translate, whereas translation is interesting because precisely it shows what you lose when you translate. And that untranslatability is precisely what structure would call differences. So it's precisely because we relate things through differences, or rather through correlations of differences, that in the end we have different languages which appear as variants of one another because they vary, they could vary, not only two of them, but three, four, and then they take a position in a system of variants or in a group of information, which show that there are bundles of differences that are intricated, and that's what we are interested in. We are not interested in the common language, but we are interested in the fact that when you change something somewhere, you need also to change something somewhere else. Therefore, there are parameters that are intricated, entangled together, and that is the kernel of the structure. So that would be the simple answer. So that's why untranslatability is not the problem, it is the fuel of structural interpretation. So Saussure, for instance, Saussure is a comparativist, as you know very well. So it's true also for Foucault, but so from Indo-European, so he's an expert in Indo-European languages. But what he says is that so what is the comparison? The comparison between French and Italian, or let's say to be more faithful to the practice of Saussure, between Sanskrit and Greek and Germanic languages. The comparison did not consist in trying to find what was common in those different languages, but on the contrary, the correlation of variations. So when something changed between Sanskrit and Greek, there was also something else that changed. And that was the beginning of the idea of structure. Change meant change. That is non-identity. But the idea that Indo-European language itself, as a kind of hypothetic object, is made of only that which changes. So it's made of if you want, Indo-European is not one particular language, it's a set of all those elements that explode in different Indo-European languages. It's not one Indo-European language, it's only the matrix of the differences. And there were many debates which I tried to reconstruct in the book at the time, precisely to understand what was the Indo-European language. Was it the language of one particular people? And Saussure takes a very clear position, said no, it is in fact the structure, that is the matrix of the variations. But that structure is not just an abstract object. He then says, well, in fact, in all languages, what is living, that's why it's a life inside, is of that kind. So when we speak, while we are speaking, we are traversed the same time carried by those entities that only exist by their own untranslatable variants. Well, I guess that's why it has also to do with the fact that structure is not paradigm in one sense. Paradigm is more like the form of the totality. Structure is a system of variants. And it's a difference and the misunderstanding that between standard structuralism and Genesian structuralism. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Solves the problem in science. Solves the problem in science. It is.
Exactly. And also to go back to the epistemological aspect, you know that famous sentence by Aristotle where he says mythology is itself another variant of the myth. So I think it's the same for the Earth. To say that in the end we should apprehend the Earth as a group of transformation or as a structure rather than one particular object, that is as a system of systems and not as one particular version of the system. It means that in fact we put back on Earth the Earth of the Earth system sciences. We put it back on Earth. So the Earth is made of the variants, and the Earth system of the Earth system sciences is just one of the variants. So just in the same way as Aristotle put himself or put anthropology back on the field of the variants themselves, and say, well, my reading of the myth of the Americas is itself a myth. But there's a different kind of myth, it's just such a myth. So it's horizontal and not vertical. It's not a top-down conception of knowledge, but more like a re-immersive conception of knowledge. So it goes in what you were saying about the epistemology of structuralism there, which is an epistemology of situated knowledge, but not in the sense of situating within a context, within a context. There is an external situation as if we knew what this external was outside of us or around us. No, we are situated not in the world, but situated in the variants. And we should redefine ourselves by differences with those other variants. So incommensurability and translatability is precisely what we need if we want to let the differences merge, appear, not merge. Emerge. I'm also using my English, so we usually speak in French.
Thank you very much. It was extremely interesting. The talk have lots of questions, but just one single question to allow other colleagues to address questions. I will have well, actually, let me ask two questions, if you don't mind, because they're very related to each other. One is relating to when you gave examples of triangles. It made me think of what would be a mathematical structuralism in your own conception of Dionysian structuralism as opposed to Apollinian structuralism. And relating to this, I'll be very curious to know what you have to say about artificial intelligence and all this hype about information theory. And of course, we have lots of different receptions and traditions in France related to theories of information. But just to make sure that I make sense of this whole thing relating to the conception of science and society and the arbitrary relationship between signifiers and signified, signifier, precisely in terms of what makes sense, after all, for communication. Because as far as I can tell, for AI, artificial intelligence, going on, these debates going on, is the idea that in order to make sense of information, we have to separate whatever is only taken to be noise or other kinds that are not necessarily going to be communicating anything, right? And therefore, perhaps this would be a very, let's say, technological, modern way, the way you describe modern science, but at least that's the way most people talk about artificial intelligence. And when they relate to linguistics, they usually compare to Chomsky. Norman is someone who knows very well these debates, because usually they would say that for Chomsky, generative grammar and in different ways that Chomsky would be thinking of language would be very much to challenge this big hype about saying that AI is going to solve all problems. They say that it's not like that. So I'd like to see how you respond to this as a structuralist yourself, to this whole AI hype. How do you see this whole thing and how you relate it to information field? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, could you remind me of the first question? Because
mathematical structuralism.
Yeah, the mathematical. Yeah, sorry. So let's start with the question of mathematics. So I am not an expert of mathematics, and so according to the kind of method that I usually defend and use myself, I should not say much about that, because the way I suggest we reread structuralism is precisely by putting it back into the practices, and in particular the scientific practices of sociology. That's why, for instance, people. That's why, for instance, I say sociology is a comparativist in the European languages, and I embed this tuition of structure in scientific practice, and I am a historian of sciences too, right? So yeah, I'm a petty historian of sciences too. I'm also a metaphysician, but I'm also a petty historian of philosophy, and I'm interested in the very Foucauldian way of doing things, and I really think that most important philosophical things happen in the petty practices, scientific or non-scientific, actually. So I should not say too much, but thankfully you have friends who tell me things, particularly in mathematics, and particularly my colleague, friend David Rabouin, who is present in this book, has also written an article in a volume I edited a long time ago in 2008 called The Moment Philosophique des années 60, the philosophical movement of the 60s, where there is, so he commented on an article on mathematical structuralism, and so the easy answer would be, well, it's category theory. Why? Because category theory is a comparative approach to mathematics, in fact. The category is not, so there is a beautiful article by a guy called Bell, just like the Bell, so it's not the same. It's a mathematician, and which I think is called relative truth, if I remember well. I read that a long time ago, but he is a category theory mathematician, and basically he says for category theory, mathematical object is not anymore like a set on which an operational structure is put. The mathematical object is something that is defined precisely by its translations, by its the way it can be transformed into another object. So function could be a number, and the way you approach mathematical objects is very familiar in a way to people like me who are immersed in comparative disciplines. So, and also Rabouin shows in that text that when the Bourbaki elaborated that notion of structure, it was not at all to give a kind of univocal definition of structure as many people imagine, and because the what I think is the normative conception of structure that many people, I'm thinking here of Vincent Descombes, the French philosopher, used to lecture their colleagues as if they knew what the true concept of structure, which was in fact the algebraic concept of structure. And if you look at what the Bourbaki really did, I mean, that practice, it was not a foundational, that's a mistake by Badiou, as a matter of fact, it was not a foundational approach to mathematics, it was a comparative approach to mathematics. And they say there are three main structures. It's, I think if I remember well, geometric, algebraic, and topological. And they say very clearly, there's no universal concept of structure. The algebraic concept is just one concept of structure. So the concept of structure is simply a comparative tool, and therefore, just like the notion of humanity or mythology or myth for the source of the earth, for me, there is no definition of that. It's just something that helps you navigate and helps you see things in a translational way. So that's the end. That's the answer. But Lévi-Strauss himself knew that category theory had to do with what he was saying, because there are passages where he expresses his unsatisfaction with the algebraic conception of structure, which he also uses, but as he says, just as a way of making it fail. That's the concept of the Klein bottle and the group of Klein, the Klein groups that were. It says, okay, that looks like a Klein group, but it is not. And then say, well, okay, people tell me that it might be like category theory. I think it's true, but I have no time to work on that because I'm too old and so on and so on. Because in the beginning of the 70s, and so there was a hype of category theory. But the secret one at the beginning, even in Badiou's theory of bubbles, which is in 68, maybe Norman, you know better.
69.
The concept of the model 69 is he ends, but it ends with category theory, and then later in the second volume of Being of the Event, he did a lot with category theory. Even though he always resisted the comparative approach, transformational approach that I defend, our difference. So that's a too long answer to the first question, to which there is a simple answer, category theory. To the next question about AI, I actually made 2 articles on that particular thing, and I'm very proud of one of them. It's been published in different languages, in Italian, French, and English, and it's called Milieu de Culture in French. You find it on the internet. And there's another one on AI and the history of structuralism. And but I'm very proud of the one on Milieu de Culture because it was at the time. So I think it was probably 2003, something like that. At the time when I was finishing the PhD thesis on Saussure and so on, and I was working on contemporary linguistics and trying to define in contemporary linguistics the Saussurean approach. Even though I am a poor philosopher, I am not a linguist, I am not an anthropologist, I am not a psychoanalyst, I am not a historian, I am not any of those things, those marvelous things. I am not earthist and scientist, nothing. I'm just a philosopher. But nonetheless, I try to defend certain theoretical approaches in particular domains, because actually I think they are not, because the community, the scientific community, doesn't do justice to those approaches. That's usually the way I see it. And at the time, I defended the connectionist approach. Connectionism was opposed to the Chomskyan physicist approach. And at the time, everybody told me, you know, connectionism, this is something from the past, it's the 20th century, look, man, drop that, it's an old idea, come on, you know. And I was saying, no, language is not made of rules. Language is made of things. And connectionism is super interesting because it precisely understands that there is no rule, there are just things, and we need to work with corpuses, not with reconstructed, generated machines. We need to work with corpuses because the whole thing about language is not calculation, it's perception. That was my idea. So that's the theory. To understand something is simply to perceive something that is only made of differences and only exists in a transformational group. So it's not that you first understand something and then you interpret it, it's that you perceive something. It's kind of gestalt, in fact. And I defended connectionism against the grain. And a few years later, as you know, the deep neural networks emerged, and then everybody changed, of course, because go with the wind, and the wind is here the money. They go with the money. Okay, I don't want to flatter myself, but at least I went with the ideas, not with the money. So I think structuralism is actually in tune with AI, with contemporary AI, a particular form of, would say, deep neural network kind of AI, except that contemporary AI has absolutely no idea of what it is doing. And I think we should defend structuralist understanding of their own efficacy. They are even in a way panicked by their efficacy, not but because of moral and political aspect. That I don't believe at all. I don't think people like Elon Musk has any ethical question. But I think many in this world are amazed by how well it works. And they are panicked by the fact that they don't understand why it works. Sometimes they simply tinker a little thing. They use something that worked for precisely. They use something that works for translation in order to, they try it on visual recognition, and it works better than everything else. And they don't know why. But then they say, okay, it works better, that we're going to use it. But they have no idea what it works. I have an interpretation for that, simply because the world is made of structures. And what you're doing with your machines is that you're capturing structures. And so I have a colleague at Zurich, at École Polytechnique, Zurich, his name is Castaldi, Juan Luis Castaldi, he's Argentinian. And he wrote his PhD thesis in philosophy about Frege, kind of a Deleuzian, structuralist understanding of the history of logic. And now he's working precisely on artificial intelligence. He started recently even a PhD thesis on in natural language processing, NLP. And he defends a structuralist understanding of contemporary automatic processing of languages. So we'll see what it will do. Of course, people in that field are both curious about those philosophical interpretations, and in fact completely indifferent because they don't quite see how it is going to help them getting the money. Right? But at the same time, they know that they don't know what they're doing. It's very similar to the situation in which Saussure found linguistics at the end of the 19th century. Actually, in the book here in Portuguese, there is a few lines, handwritten lines by Saussure on the cover of the book, and in this line, it's their decision, has nothing to do with that, but it's a passage where Saussure says that nothing that the linguists do makes sense, even though the science is super powerful. So I think that's the most interesting moment in life, where things work very well, but you don't understand why. Therefore, you have a kind of philosophical perplexity. Because philosophy, as you know, is not something that is here to solve obvious problems when things don't work. It's there because precisely when it works, it's even worse. So I think we are in the same situation. It should be a very strong philosophical moment. It should be, but it is not. It's not for, say, because of the nature of the scientific infrastructure that, notwithstanding what they say, is not meant to create those bridges between philosophy and technology and sciences. So, and as for Chomsky, I think Chomsky was wrong. He was wrong, and he's so powerful in terms of he shoots so quickly, and that's the entire history of Chomskism. I'm not sure what Norman would say, but since the very beginning, Chomsky was refuted, and since he was so quick to reply and change his own system, he ended up giving the impression that he anticipated everything, when in fact he was always behind. And he's right about the fact that this whole hype about AI is misguided in a way, but he's certainly wrong about the fact that there is nothing, he doesn't say quite that, but that there is nothing to gain from that. I think they are on the right side of the question, and he was on the wrong side. And it's not usually when people want to discard AI, they say, well, it's just statistic. Yes, but that is what is interesting, right? That statistics gives you an understanding of reality. It's not the only time in human knowledge when we have realized that. Quantum mechanics was another one. You're not going to say it's just statistic, right? It's the only way to understand the reality of it. So, well, it actually has to do with information theory, which is a statistical theory. So it's another aspect of something I am interested in. I will speak of that actually. Is it tomorrow that I speak of the? Yeah, tomorrow morning, right?
Yeah.
No, it's tomorrow morning at 10.
No, it's not here.
Not here, but at the other university, I will make a lecture called Myth and Particles, and where I will present the work of this unknown French physicist, quantum physicist of the time of Lévi-Strauss. His name is Pierre Auger, Auger, and from which Lévi-Strauss had this his own ontology of the science. I will try to come back to that, but it's the idea that information being statistics, it has to do with the general nature of reality. Not just a matter of the lack of our knowledge, it's the matter of the nature of reality, which is not determined in the way we think things are determined, but it's not univocal. Anyway, thank you for that question that carried us far into speculative realms.
Any other questions? Gabriela? Like to, we have a few more minutes, so well, indeed, there's so many points here that I'd like to discuss. Very specific points. I suppose particularly this appreciate. I've read some of your criticisms of Chomsky. I'm not sure if you also include his work on biolinguistics in most recent publications, let's say from 2002. But that's a more technical point, so perhaps we'll leave it for Thursday. But what let's say from a pedagogical, we're having this frustration recently, particularly regarding the commemorations of Foucault. As we find a lot of our colleagues from the education field appropriating philosophical research and reducing it, and for some reason they want to blend in with the philosophers, and at the same time they're marginalizing the philosophers. But from this angle, from a pedagogical or educational perspective, because after all, in the university, the field in which I've conducted much of the work around structuralism is contemporary French philosophy. It's philosophy done in the French language. It's philosophy that cites predominantly the authors of the French tradition. And at times we've had to, defend the rigor and the scientific, methodological, and epistemological basis and diversity of French thought, because there has been this characterization of French thought as a postmodernist, or this term post-structuralist often disfigures and tries to freeze French thought into a particularly aesthetic realm. And your work is really very focused on apart from benefiting and taking advantage of this great bibliography of various philosophical and rationalists' ventures, it seems to me that you're involved in a certain characterization of philosophy as done through the French idiom. And I want to ask you just your impressions on this question of different philosophical traditions, because I mean the topic is the earth and globality, and yet there's the French context, and even though I mean you do cite individuals coming from different cultures, is there something specifically, I know of course your Sociolian comment is would tend to answer no, I suppose, to this question, but is there something specifically, or what are the dimensions of the French way of doing philosophy that you see as characterizing this type of approach? Because you are also seeking to persuade in your characterization of this new structuralism that this approach reaches something that perhaps the other philosophical traditions are not touching upon. And I know you've tried to focus on what the criteria are, but I'm curious about this. This is the limitation of the field. We were speaking about this a little bit, about you returning also to philosophy, seeking a grounding in philosophy. I think perhaps one of an addition that I could make to Professor Tomor's question, it seems to me that this idea of system here is also, and particularly in your comment about the Peruvian anthropologist, is always in the process of producing a supplement or an excess, by which we also see some of the traits of a French interest, right? So the first question would be really about the French nature of the enterprise, and the second question that I have is whether this idea of Dionysian structuralism is something that is eventually always in excess of a formalized or logical mapping of what's going on. Something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. So about my Frenchness, it's a hard question. I'm losing my voice. It's a hard question, right? And when I was recruited at the University of Essex, I gave a paper on Deleuze and Chomsky to show that Deleuze was more right about language than Chomsky. That what made me recruited, because it was a department that was claimed at least to be doing something that they called analytical philosophy. No, sorry, continental philosophy in analytical style. So translating Hegel, Kant. I mean, they started with Kant, and Kant is the most amicable continental philosopher for analytical philosopher. But then Hegel, the analytical Hegel, and so on. And they were Schopenhauer, Adorno, Kierkegaard, and so on. And suddenly they found someone with whom they could actually translate Deleuze, which then was out of their translation stage. And they were very happy. And my friend and colleague Sandra Logier said, well, but that was a misunderstanding, because you're not doing continental philosophy in analytical style. You're doing analytical philosophy in a continental style. So that says something about, but to be more serious, it's true that it's still for me a little mystery what happened that made the French moment of the 60s, more between the aftermath of the Second World War and maybe today. such a creative space for philosophy, I'm not sure, but there's one particular reason, or I think one particular way by which we can characterize that philosophical movement by opposition with two other traditions, the phenomenological tradition, let's say the German one, and the analytical tradition, let's say the British one, the English one. And it's all about the question of the sign. What I think the French philosophical space has welcomed was this idea that signs are entities. And that was completely unthinkable for the philosophical tradition since the very beginning. Even Aristotle, says that signs are basically material entities, not material, but sensible entities, to which is associated something immaterial. He says the pathemata, the affections of the mind, and there is no one in the entire philosophical tradition that simply saw that signs are not obviously given perceptual entities, that there is a problem with the perception of signs, not a problem with the understanding of signs. If you look at the philosophical speculation, it's all about either the syntax or the semantic. It's never about the perception. What Saussure brought to the philosophical conversation is the attention to the perception of the sign, saying, well, look, the problem is not meaning, the problem is perceiving signs. And when you've understood it, that's a good place to say, when you understood how signs are perceived by particular people, then you don't need to ask any question about how they understand things. You already know how they understand things, because it's all a matter of dual perception. Signs are synesthesia. So even though the philosophical tradition of the 60s didn't really elaborate this particular point so clearly, even though we find it in Deleuze, in Derrida, and so on, I think there was a reception of this extraordinary provocation. It was, and it's a philosophical scandal. It's something completely new in philosophy. And I insist on that for the entire philosophical tradition. No philosopher in the entire history of philosophy. Look at what Quine says about translation, Gavagai. And then what does it mean, Gavagai? No, the problem is not what Gavagai means. The problem is how do we perceive, hear Gavagai? And Saussure says, in front of a foreign language, the problem is not that you don't understand what people say, that you don't even perceive what they say. You perceive noise, If you, myself, here, sometimes if it was written down, I couldn't understand what people are saying. But when they pronounce it, I don't hear it. It wasn't cheap. That's the way I hear it. So the problem is perception. And that is really that's why I'm saying it's the most important philosophical question of all. Really, and I believe that. And I think this kind of seismic event is under the success, I would say, of French philosophy. That it's, in a certain way, it welcomed that. How did it welcome that? Probably because of Lévi-Strauss. Probably because of I would say probably because of the relation between Bergsonism, between Bergson on the one hand, and Lévi-Strauss on the other hand. Even though there is this very famous line, not famous, I would like it to be famous, but there is this line by Lévi-Strauss where he says, it's in Tristrotropique, he says, I abandoned philosophy because I thought that people in philosophy should be taught the course in general linguistics by Saussure more than the données immédiates de la conscience by Bergson. But in fact, what was specific probably to the French context, that they had both Bergson and structuralism, and that gave Deleuze. I have my equation. Deleuze equates Bergson plus structuralism. It's a very simple equation. I think it works very well. And it's precisely the structure of structuralism here. It's the matrix of transformation. It's the shock that made that entire philosophy move, I think. So that's a possible interpretation of the Frenchness of it. Structuralism as such is not at all a French intellectual event. It's simply its philosophical reception that is very French. That is very French. And again, For the phenomenological tradition, meaning was consciousness. For the analytical tradition, meaning was reference. For the structuralist tradition, meaning is not the problem. The problem is the ontology of the sign. It's the being of the sign. It's not the meaning of the sign. That changes everything. That creates a third tradition within contemporary philosophy. And yes, you're right there. So it's this that I think is more important than the dissenter and so on. Even that probably is part of the story too. So, and I don't know why, but I would say the reason or the opposition between the most creative and interesting opposition is between two forms of dialectics within contemporary philosophy. I would say the dialectics of Kantian Hegelian heritage, which is focused around the notion of contradiction, and the dialectics of group transformations. They discuss, which in fact Deleuze and even Althusser re-elaborated upon. There are two different traditions of dialectics, and that has not been very well perceived, I think. The Frenchness of structuralism is about a different kind of dialectics, and meaning by that the critique of the concept of essence is what is common between the German and the French tradition. But in the German tradition, until now, look at the Adornians, and we have a lot of Adornians here. It's all about negation and negativity. The kind of dialectics that I defend doesn't need the concept of negation. We only need the concept of variation, but of a particular kind of variation, which first is completely immanent, and then is also unterminable, is unfinishable. And that is the kind of little Derridian moment in my talk, but it's just a moment, it's not the year. And Derrida in 19 is not the one philosopher that would help us the best to understand this excess of variation over its own local capture. And to conclude on the formalization, I think there is a lot of fantasy about formalization. Formalization is just a way of increasing the variability of our way of approaching things. Even in mathematics, I think formalization for me is more, the more you formalize, the more you are able to see true formations between things. The formalization is not about stabilizing the kind of formal view or the skeleton, to drop the idea of the skeleton. Formalization is not about the skeleton, as Schopenhauer would say, as if it was a solid thing. Formalization is on the contrary, seeing things more in more transformational way. The more you formalize, the more you can see relations between very distant things. That's why actually Levi-Strauss was interested in formalization, because he was a comparativist. And therefore, thanks to formalization, you could say, oh, something that is documented within the Maoris can be compared to something that is only documented in the in people in the Alaska, in the PUCRS, for instance. Because formalization helped making this relation. And I think maybe the best epistemological understanding of structuralism, Dionysian structuralism, has been given by Bachelard, as a matter of fact. In the philosophy of the no, and in other texts, Bachelard uses the word surrationalisme, in relation to surrealism. And you know how Marcel Mauss ends his essay on the gift. He says there, and also Levi-Strauss actually uses it. So finishes his article on Mauss, his introduction to the work of Marcel Mauss on that. It says there are more moons than we can imagine in the firmament of reason. That there are more forms of reason in the sky of reason. Not that there is no sky of reason, but the sky of reason is made of many skies. And that is not an anti-rationalist position. It's not even a hyper-rationalist position. It's yes, sur-rationalist position. And that I think is is what is behind that. So why that has been more elaborated in French academia, in the French intellectual space of the 60s, I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet. Maybe because of also the complex relation to modernity. So it could be a reason. There's this book by Christian Ross called Fast Cars and Clean Bodies, where she explains that Lévi-Strauss and structuralism is part of the modernization of France, just like Orly and TS, Citroën, and basically De Gaulle. Right? So it's a kind of a rather disparaging way of looking at structuralism as a technocratic view, but I think this is a misreading of structuralism. So probably structuralism is sort of a redemption of modernism. It would be a good modernism. Maybe it's a form of wishful thinking that you could modernize in a humble way. And that is exactly what Lévi-Strauss had in mind. To modernize not in a hegemonic way, by crashing down everything in the name of pure reason, but modernize as a way of putting yourself back on the map in a more precise way, that is in the group of variations, so as to intensify the variations that we are, rather than extensify the identity that we think we have grasped. And that is probably my last word.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Patrice Maniglier.
Thanks to you.
So tomorrow's event will be at 10 o'clock at
10 o'clock at
PUCRS. Amanhã às 10 horas
Yeah,
na...
the cars are together. Os cartazes estão juntos eu não sei se foi tudo junto, mas eu tenho o meu último post no Facebook, tá? Com os cartazes da URGS juntos, no Departamento de Antropologia Social. No Campus do Vale. E quinta-feira vai ser na sala...
Quinta-feira, então, vai ser na sala 305, no prédio 8. Então, mudamos de 222 para 305 para dar mais espaço, particularmente para os integrantes da mesa. Então, muito obrigado pela participação, satisfação e até mais.